Shin Megami Tensei V seems to be one of the most divisive games in the entire franchise, whether it be newer fans suffering from confusion at the lack of social links, or older fans wondering why my mainline SMT game has me going back to school. It's evident that there are mixed opinions on the latest Shin Megami Tensei. No more apparent is this than when it comes to discourse surrounding the story of SMT V, with a large part of the community seeming to really dislike SMT V's story and condemning it as nothing but a backdrop, with many people even trying to cope and act as though SMT was never about good stories and it's simply a vehicle for the gameplay, which is extremely untrue in every game past the first. So I thought I'd actually dive deep into the story of SMT V, one of, if not my favorite SMT game, and with the upcoming SMT V Vengeance, I thought now would be the perfect time to see if SMT V was being misunderstood and could potentially rival or surpass the narrative depth of the Persona series, or if the fandom was just spitting facts the entire time and I was just simply clueless. Fundamentally, I believe SMT V to be a story that entirely focuses on one person, the protagonist, Nahobina. Well, who could have guessed, Kai, a story focusing on its protag with an amazing insight? And you'd be right, so let me elaborate. What I mean by focusing on its protagonist, Naho, is that the story entirely revolves around him and who he is. To draw comparison to Persona, those games are much more broad in their narrative. For instance, that story spends a lot of time developing its side characters alongside its protagonists in a kind of symbiotic relationship. As the side characters develop, it in turn develops the protag, and those games build cohesion in the cast through this method. Where SMT V differs is that it's a story that isn't trying to develop its side cast. The side cast are there to represent themes and internal conflicts of its protagonist, Naho. Every moment of SMT V revolves around Naho's decisions and conflicts, and its story hones it and entirely focuses on his isolation and separation from humanity. To phrase it differently, stories like Persona are very character reliant. Their stories are good because their characters are good. It's necessary for those characters to be so heavily developed because they are central to the story. You just don't have a story without them. Meanwhile, in SMT V, the structure of the story is vastly different. It's far more contained and only wants to focus on one character instead of relying on well-executed characters, plural, to uphold its narrative. It relies on well-executed themes and conflicts that just one character goes through, that being our protagonist, Naho. Atlus created both Persona and SMT. They know how to write characters and they understand what makes a character good. Everyone loves Joker or Akechi, for instance. These are well-executed characters, so it seems strange that the sidecast of SMT V seems so underdeveloped in comparison. And I had a similar thought process for a long time, until I started looking at the story differently. I stopped viewing SMT like I viewed Persona, as a character-driven narrative that required a good, well-executed cast to uphold its story. When I switched to viewing it as a story about one boy, one character, and his struggles, and the conflicts and themes he endures, the story made so much more sense. Now, I had to go on this massive tangent because it sets up how we should be looking at SMT V going forward. The things we are focusing on is not how side characters overcome their difficulties or how Naho influences and changes them. It's the opposite. We look at how Naho is treated by the side characters and how he chooses to progress in the story, how he interacts with others and the world itself, how he overcomes obstacles and conflicts. It's a very internal story and a very isolated one. It focuses on one person and one person only to get across its central themes: isolation and one's own humanity. With that out of the way, let's actually delve deep into the story of Shin Megami Tensei V. The game begins with Naho in class, bored and staring off into space. It seems as though something is occupying Naho's mind, something that's distracting him from focusing on class. That, or it's entirely possible, he just doesn't care about the class, something we can all relate to. Moving slightly ahead, we are introduced to the sidecast: Tao, Yuzuru, Dazai, and Miyazu. It took me a while to fully understand the scene, but I want to take a moment to point out that many people think that Naho is initially already friends with this group, that he already knows them and has an established relationship with them, but that doesn't actually seem to be true. Earlier, the teacher in class asked for everyone to go home in pairs, We spend some time talking to people and asking if anyone wants to walk home, with no one accepting Naho's request. This is the first instance of Naho being alone and isolated, a recurring theme in SMT 5. It's minor, but that's the point. We're not meant to notice it the first time round. What reinforces the idea, however, is how this sidecast group of friends that all know each other don't actually know the protagonist that well, with Yuzuru even saying that you guys have only just met a couple times at school, implying there is no meaningful connection between Naho and the rest of the group, since the rest of the group doesn't actually seem to know Naho that well either, outside of a foundational, if that. It presents the idea that Naho keeps to himself, alone, and is often just reading a book by himself. He has no connection to anyone else, and others seemingly only speak to him out of a just kind of social obligation. The group offering to walk home with him was probably just chance. They likely would have offered to walk home with anyone if they were in the same situation. Naho, I don't believe, was any special. Now, you could interpret that they do know each other more concretely based on the way they address the protagonist and how they already seem familiar, but I would argue, if true, then it's a very much a surface level relationship. Yuzuru cares about his sister a great deal and is always trying to protect her, and seems to spend most of his time with her. Yet Miyazu, his sister, has only met Naho in passing a couple times, which would be odd if they were such close friends. It definitely seems like there is a familiarity with the protagonist, but very much at a surface level. It's important to understand this, since it ties into the ending of the game, which is way later, so stick with me for now. After a murder at the hands of most likely a demon in the train station, Naho takes an alternate path and encounters Dazai. He enters the tunnel, and it collapses, along with us being transported to the Netherworld. Dart. The Netherworld, also known as the Expanse, but in this game commonly referred to as Dart, is oppressive. The scorching sun and heavy use of yellow creates a dry atmosphere that sucks out the life from the scene, symbolizing how demons have erased any presence of life here. And to cement that feeling, Naho watches as an angel abducts Dazai, and he himself is instantly set upon by demons. I want to draw attention to the scene as well. Notice how the angel saves Dazai, but Naho is left to fend for himself, alone once again. Now, of course, there's context. The angel just didn't see Naho or could only save Dazai. But from an overarching view, it's interesting that we have another instance of others failing to help Naho. The only reason we live through this Jump Kaizen moment is because Aogami rescues us. When Aogami fuses with Naho and becomes one with him, we are turned into what is known as a Naho Bino. Now, for clarity's sake, whenever I'm talking about the protagonist, I will call them Naho, as I have been, and when I'm talking about the race of gods, I will call them Naho Bino. After looking through some interviews for the game, for this video, I came across the repeated mention of the Naho Bino being the god of unity, singular, not plural. While this could just be a translation thing, since the interviews were in Japanese originally, I think it matches the story if it is in fact singular, and thus referring to the protagonist. It's ironic then that Naho, who so far has been so alone and without connection, is the god of unity, and finds connection with Aogami, the other half of his soul. They are essentially the same person. Humanity could not give a connection to Naho, but once he enters the world of demons, he almost instantly forms one of the deepest connections you could have with someone, literally fusing body and soul together. This is the first instance of the story separating Naho from humanity and showing his disconnect from it. A common game mechanic in Megaten games is demon negotiation, convincing demons to join you and fight by your side. In other games, its purpose in the story is almost non-existent, and that's fine. It's had no real need to be relevant. Only in SMT 3 would I say that negotiation has had some relevance to the character and main narrative. But in 5, I think the mechanic is fundamental to the story. Naho is constantly talking with and engaging and forming connections with demons, even taking on their requests and fighting for their sake. He's always rescuing allies from demons and protecting them when they are in danger. Naho seems to have a genuine concern for demons, who in pretty much all forms of mythology and religion are considered abhorrent and pure evil. But even with this in mind, Naho still chooses to protect many of them and fight for their safety in these side quests, which makes certain sacrifices he makes way later in the story much more impactful, since he genuinely cares about these demons. It shows that Naho doesn't care about these preconceived notions of evil and is judging each demon based on who they are. If we place ourselves into his shoes, we can see why he's able to form connection with these demons like Amanazaka, a true companion to Nahobino, and someone we meet quite early on. Naho isn't alone in the demon world. He has allies in the forms of demons he fights with, and Aogami and Amanazaka, whereas in the human world, he is far more isolated, with humans constantly asking him to solve their problems and help them, whereas in the demon world, it seems like he seeks out those in trouble far more than demons constantly asking for his help. I wanted to point this out because for our protagonist to be able to immerse himself and form such a deep connection with demons, far more than his fellow humans, shows a distance between his humanity and others. Naho's own humanity doesn't seem so fundamental and intrinsic as it does for other characters in SMT V. Characters like Sahori suffer from very real and human problems. She tries her best for others, and they punish her for it, bullying her. In contrast, Naho is distant from these problems. His isolation and loneliness doesn't follow him, doesn't allow him to suffer human problems like this. In the demon world, when he tries his best for demons, they praise him and see him for what he is, a true god that is helping him. Sahori even goes on to become a partial Nahobina like our main protagonist. However, she, deep down, rejects the demonic side of her soul, and thus prevents Lamu from attaining his true power, unlike us, who have accepted that power as a part of us and coexist with Aogami, simply struggling to use the full extent of our abilities. This is again supported by game mechanics like Essence Fusion and Miracles. Essence Fusion is the act of Naho literally taking the essence of a demon, essence of something commonly being defined as something that gives something else its somethingness, like the essence of water being waterness. For Naho, to fuse the essence into himself is to fuse the everything that a demon is and himself. Naho is willing to accept the idea of fusing with what could be the most foul, evil creatures in existence into himself in pursuit of creating a better world and helping others. Also, tying into his title of the God of Union, by unifying the core of demons and himself into one being, taking this into himself and then persevering into even greater challenges, shows that Naho doesn't actually care about adversity or is unafraid of sacrifice. As more of your being is filled with the essence of demons, it stands to reason that comparatively your humanness would shrink. Naho sacrificing his own humanity by embracing his demon side of Aogami, all for the betterment of humans and demons, is an extraordinary feat of kindness and understanding, but in doing so, he continues to isolate himself since no one else in the entire verse understands what his journey is like, at least not until near the end of SMT V. Miracles help enforce this idea as well, with Naho wielding the power of God to reshape reality to how he thinks it should be, and besides it being foreshadowing of the true ending, it also shows us more of that drifting humanity as Naho's power grows and he comes closer to returning to his full godly power that YHVH, or the God of Law, feared and condemned humanity to avoid. Even angels point out that Naho's existence is heresy, that every breath he takes is an act against God, and that scares them. Naho is persecuted for the very act of existing, whilst other humans are rescued and protected by angels, again separating him from other humans. Others see Naho as a friend, a soldier, a hero, or a god, but that's never what he truly is or seems to want. Naho just simply wants to help as many people as he can, initially, but as time progresses and his humanity drifts away, his goal shifts from sacrificing his own well-being and humanity to help others, to completely abandoning it and creating a world free from evil. But we will get to that later. Returning to Sahori and Lamu for a moment, I find it fascinating that the structure of their arc is supposed to represent what would have happened to Naho if he did not sync well with Aogami. Sahori and Lamu fundamentally disconnect from each other because Sahori isn't a being of such malice and hate that Lamu is, and despite Sahori being his other half, he's unable to fully form with her because he can't align with her. Even forcing such a connection failed to provide a true form. It shows that Naho and Aogami are truly halves of one being, Naho himself being a bit of an exception to the rule, given that he's the Nahobino for multiple different demons, but that's besides the point. The reason I want to talk about this Sahori and Lamu section though, is because within the attack on the school, it's established that the more a human uses the demon summoning program, the closer they become to demons themselves, taking on traits of their personality and becoming more concerned with the ethereal than the real. While Naho does not use the demon summoning program, I feel like the effects should still apply to him, given his constant fusing and his soul fusing with Aogami's, and this results in an already distant Naho becoming much more reserved and focused on his objectives rather than the concerns of his own humanity. To give an example of this, time and time again in the Sahori arc, we see Tao and others constantly reinforce that our objectives is to save Sahori, and do whatever it takes to get her away from Lamu and eliminate Lamu. Tao wishes to save Sahori, and Aogami constantly reminds us our goal is to game end Lamu. With this in mind, we are given multiple choices leading up to the confrontation with Lamu, all going along the lines of either we have to stop Lamu or we have to save Sahori. When the final battle happens, Naho steps in front of Tao and gives his life to save her. Naho actually died doing this. Lamu even states that he made sure we were dead. Our protagonist is gone, at least he is until Tao sacrifices her own life to bring him back. It's then that something truly fascinating happens. Naho stands up and simply walks towards Sahori and kills her without any hesitation, despite clearly seeing Sahori fighting against Lamu for control. In my eyes, this is showing a rebirth of the protagonist, from death a new life. A version of him is born, one vastly closer to Aogami in personality. The reason for this, I believe, is because Naho realized how ultimately pointless his sacrifice was. Despite stepping in and trying to save Tao, she died anyway, and his death achieved nothing. Even with all our decisions up to this point, at least in my playthrough, focusing on saving Sahori, Naho swiftly decided to kill her before even trying to let her fight it out for control, which we have seen her somewhat successfully do before this, and even somewhat do during this scene. In my eyes, after Naho is resurrected, he becomes so disconnected from his own humanity that he's willing to kill another human without hesitation, simply because she poses a threat, and it was the easiest way of killing Lamu. Remember, it was Tao's wish to save Sahori. With Tao gone, Naho had lost any reason to try and save her. Only the notion of human decency would be reason to save her, because it's the right thing to do. But with Tao gone, and that humanity being stripped away, to Naho it becomes simple to just kill Sahori in order to kill Lamu. Now, I won't say that Naho's humanity is entirely gone here. It's entirely possible that he killed her out of respect for her, as a sort of mercy killing, you could think. But I still think there is some humanity left, because I think there is a specific point later on in the story where it's made very clear that Naho's humanity is entirely gone from him. But at this point, I think there is a clear checkpoint of sorts, marking that a large chunk of the human Naho is gone, and our protagonist has come much closer to the god of the new world that he is pushed into being. After Lamu, Naho and Aogami are left mostly alone for a while, and it's here they encounter Yakumo once again. Yakumo challenges Naho's actions up to this point. We've been mostly helping demons of Bethel and various demons we encounter, but Yakumo thinks they are a blight on humanity and need to be erased entirely, even pointing out that Naho himself has suffered from demons too. Aogami further adding that he himself has made Naho's life difficult as well. Yakumo is essentially asking Naho the question, how much are you willing to sacrifice, since Naho keeps defending demons when they are also taking so much from him and others. And while the connection between Naho and Tao at the start of the game was very limited, as they journeyed together, I think they at least became friends, so Tao's death likely did, if anything, annoy Naho a great deal, or cause him some pain, given he gave his life to save her, and she died bringing him back. But since his humanity is fading, we can see it does not emotionally distress him as he keeps fighting with his stoic expression. When he reaches Chiyoda, the only real emotion he showed was either a look of determination or anger at the demons fighting in the sky. And as Naho progresses through Chiyoda, I think the beginnings of his ideals begin to form. Many of the characters question why Naho serves Bethel, and that Bethel are no better than the forces of chaos, and only really serve their own interests. It's also here that the four riders approach Naho and explain why he was selected to hold the menorah. They imply the demi-fiend, the protagonist of Shin Megami Tensei 3, chose Naho specifically believing that Naho could end the cycle of creation and destruction. and end the constant rising and falling of creator gods, finally bringing about peace. With this in mind, I believe that Naho began to form his plans of creating a new world free of demons and gods, a new world without demons that would be free of suffering, like Yakumo had suggested, but not so extremist as Yakumo. Although Naho has the beginnings of his ideals, the remnants of his humanity conflict with it, as it would mean for him to go against essentially everyone in existence for the purpose of creating a new world. This is why Naho continues to serve Bethel at this point, I believe, because he's unsure of himself at this point, implied in my eyes by his service to Bethel, but his quest to find all the menorahs, giving him power greater than all and greater than everyone in Bethel. Once the protagonist defeats the Demon King Aryak, he's reminded by Abdiel that his existence, despite all the good he's done up to this point, is heresy, and one day she will have to determine if he's allowed to live. That day comes very soon, as at the Bethel summit, Naho's existence is used as a weapon to disorganize Bethel and incite for what is all intents and purposes rebellion. Abdiel feels she is then compelled to kill Naho. It's at this point, I believe, Naho truly disconnected as a human and fully became a Naho Bina, or a true god. The entire story so far, Naho has served Bethel and risked his life to achieve their ends, partly because he was forced into it, but partly because they acted as though they upheld justice and wanted to protect everyone. Once Abdiel tries to kill Naho for the crime of simply existing, it allows Naho to understand that the world is fundamentally flawed and needs to be changed, and that Bethel was really no different to the forces of chaos he had just finished fighting. Abdiel was going to kill Naho simply because her ideology and faith could not exist as long as he was alive, and she valued her beliefs more than the life of essentially a child. This is no different to the forces of chaos, who were just killing everything because they believed through chaos true freedom would be born. Both of these ideologies were far too extreme on each side, and at the summit, and partly from a few talks with Nuwa and Yakumo, Naho realizes that the only way to resolve this conflict is to erase it by creating a world for only humans. This is implied by our battle with Odin. When he asks what we plan to do and we tell him we plan to create a new world, he understands us completely, telling us in no misleading way that our humanity is dead and we have truly transcended. This one sentence seems so minor, but it tells us so much about Naho's actions up to this point. Odin barely knows us, but is able to easily see that our humanity has vanished. It recontextualizes all of our actions up to this point, because it allows us to look at every previous scene through the lens of someone slowly losing that humanity. Tao's death, Yakumo's challenge, and Abiel's condemnation, all of these scenes and more help us understand how Naho is groomed by fate into becoming God, even though his intentions was just to help others, and over time, they morph and change into much grander ideals purely because Da'at, demons, angels, and gods all, if even unintentionally, manipulate and push him into being the next god. Ultimately, when the protagonist reaches the entrance to the Empyrean, he's confronted with the choice, what will the next world be? And where I think SMT V truly becomes a masterpiece is in its true ending. Naho overcomes his absent humanity and still chooses to make a world for humans alone. Despite being the furthest from human, he makes the greatest sacrifice for them, challenging his friends and comrades, arguing through his actions that the next world is only for humans. Gods and demons have no place in it. So, Naho defeats his friends, claims the throne, and is ready to make a world just for humans. But he's stopped by Lucifer, who explains how pointless it would be, and yet how possible it is, at the same time, to create such a world. Lucifer explains that even if you wiped demons from existence, humanity is fated to bring them back into existence. However, Naho can make his ideal a reality by consuming Lucifer, transcending beyond God, the throne, and all else, and stop the Mandala cycle, endless destruction and creation. I call this the ultimate sacrifice for humanity because Naho loses everything to achieve this. In wiping out demons and gods and destroying the Mandala cycle, Aogami, his one true friend and the other part of him, his half of his soul, half of who he is wiped from existence too. Thus, Naho must spend all of eternity in complete isolation, a sacrifice he is willing to make in order for humanity to truly be free. It's truly inspiring to see someone who had lost every drop of his humanity overcome that and still sacrifice everything he has for their future. Someone who had become entirely a god, acting in complete benevolence toward humanity. Naho's actions overcome the selfish zealousness of Bethel and their world of order, and overcome the forces of chaos and their misunderstanding of true freedom, to create a world of peace. The final cutscene of Shin Megami Tensei V shows us Naho created a world almost exactly as it was, but without demons and without mandala. We see him resting on a bench, watching over the recreation of himself, free to live a normal life, sacrificing his own in exchange. To me, the ending of SMT V and this scene shows that even though Naho sacrificed everything for humanity, he is still watching over them and making sure they are safe. To me, represented by him watching over the recreation of himself, ensuring that evil won't reappear and destroy his or anyone else's life like it did for Naho. To me, SMT V is a story of adversity and determination. SMT V is about how even though we can lose ourselves to our ideals and lose our humanity, we can always do good things and can always achieve kindness and do the right thing. That even when we lose everything, we can always see past that to do what is right. Seeing Naho have his life ripped away from him and forced to fight demons, lose all of his friends and have to kill most of them with his own hands, to have all of his humanity drained away by his fusion and progression as a Nahobino, and finally be confronted by others just like him, and to see past all of it and know what has to be done for the greater good, is truly masterful. Many people see SMT V's story the exact same way they would view Persona 5's story. They attempt to see it as a web of characters interlocking and building off each other, but that's just simply not what SMT V's story is in my eyes. SMT V's story is about the journey of one boy and everyone's attempts to manipulate him and control him, all trying to steer him toward their own ideals. But he's able to push past that and discover who he is and what he believes he has to do, and accepts what he has to sacrifice in order to achieve that. And to me, that makes Shin Megami Tensei V a masterpiece. Wow, that took an extreme amount of time to make. Thank you to everyone who stuck around this long. Like, seriously, I cannot thank you enough. It means a lot to me that you would sit through a video for this long and show me so much. I truly thank you for that. It means a lot to me that I can make content like this and at least someone will watch it. I really want to talk about the narrative of characters and how well written so many different characters in fiction are, as well as give my own interpretations of their stories. And as such, my next video is still kind of undecided, but I'm leaning heavily toward either Ghost of Tsushima or Persona 5. I want to show that I wasn't hating on Persona 5 in this video. It was just the story everyone kept comparing SMT 5 to which I thought was extremely misleading and misunderstanding of what SMT 5 was supposed to be, at least in my eyes. Also, if you disagree with my interpretation of the story, that's perfectly okay. SMT 5, by its nature, is up for a lot of interpretation, and if you see it differently, let me know in the comments and we can all talk about it. Again, thank you for watching, and I really do mean that, and I hope you have a wonderful day.